So today, something I wanted to do that was just fun for me while I was eating my lunch, watching some board game video, was go through the previous winners for the World Fantasy Award, because I haven't really looked into it that much, and in the recent years, it's had winners that I've liked or have wanted to read, so it's like, is this award becoming an award that aligns with my taste? And then just also for history's sake, I'm like, I wonder what has won in the past. And so for the purposes of this video, we're gonna start in 2005 and work our way up. And part of that is because I started reading adult fantasy in 2005. And so that felt like as good of a year to start as any. Some things I know and some things I really don't. I definitely almost always know some of the works that are nominated, but I do not always know the winner. It seems fairly interesting. And how this award works, I believe, and it's actually been kind of tricky for me to really figure out how the voting works. Nominations seems to make more sense to me than voting. But you either are part of the judging panel. I don't know how that's selected, but presumably it's selected by the World Fantasy Committee or something like that. And then you have people who attend the convention or have attended in the past 2 years, I think, is the window. And it's kind of like the Hugos, where the attendance or supporting fee is between $50 and $200, something like that. And so you pay to be able to be a part of the process. And I think it's like two of the 5 slots are usually nominated by the people who attend, and then the other 3 are nominated by the judges. So you got a blend of a panel and popular vote. And I do not actually know how the final voting works, other than I know judges are probably involved, but I can't get a sense of if it's also a blend there. Regardless, this award has had some interesting selections, so I thought it would just be fun to go through it. So starting in 2005, and like, it's also really fun looking through things and seeing what has like stood the test of time, because like, it's been a minute. I did not know this book was this old, because it is still always talked about on BookTube. And this is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And in general, the other books that came out that year, I don't personally know them that well. So this would have been the one that I knew, that I was familiar with. I don't know a lot about it. I feel like I get the sense that it's like when people want atmospheric and kind of slice of life, not cozy per se, and I get the sense that this whole thing is like the dual companionship is very Watson Holmes. I could be really wrong there, just when people talk about it. And then people always talk about Jane Austen a little bit when they talk about this book. It's sort of on my list to try out one day. Sort of. I'm scared of it. It's really long. It's like really chunky. I am more likely to read Piranesi by this author than this book. Especially because it doesn't really have a lot of my buzzwords. It's like a historical fantasy, and I think it's pretty low magic, so it's not really ringing any bells. Although I do believe around this time, like, some low magic, like, contemporary fantasy was pretty popular. Not that this is contemporary, but, you know. I'm just thinking about other, like, Neil Gaiman books I had read around the time. The next year, I've definitely heard of the winner. I know nothing about it, and I have zero interest in reading it, but this is Kafka on the Shore. It's a really famous Japanese author, and this is one of his most famous works. I think he has quite a few that people talk about, but the one with the cat on the cover, which is, I believe, this one, people always talk about it. I don't know what it's about. I know it's very magical realism adjacent. I know that he has a weird way of describing women and sex. That's all I got. Plot-wise, no idea. I think this one might be about a kid. Unsure. That's how much I've been interested in it. In terms of other books that came out that year, I guess this is the one I know. So far, for 2005 and 2006, they tended to pick a book that stood the test of time. That trend is not going to continue, because I looked through this list while I was having lunch. I was just like, I don't know many of these books. So like, this year's interesting. So 2007, I have read 2 of the books that are on the nomination list, but I did not read the winner. The winner is actually a 3rd book in a series by Gene Wolfe. It's called Soldiers of Sedan. I know nothing about this. I know his other series, that's like those 2, well, I think it's 4 books that are in 2 collections that everyone's always talking about, is like one of the original Dying Earth series. That's not what this is. I don't know what this is. Gene Wolfe in general, early on in this award series, he's like one of the few authors who's like won twice. So fairly popular among these convention goers and judges. But what is surprising, well, one that's not surprising, but like is cool to see on the list because I've read it, is Lisey's Story by Stephen King, which I really like. I do like Lisey's Story, and I like the inclusion of horror in a fantasy award. I think that makes sense. But the one that I think stood the test of time, that I think maybe they were all sleeping on potentially, was The Lies of Locke Lamora. Like, that's a book that people still talk about today. Like, I don't love it as much as everyone else, but I can respect its place in modern fantasy and what people have been getting from it, what people are inspired to write because of it. But yeah, Lies of La Gomorrah, that's like the biggest hitter on this. Now that said, Soldiers of Sidon could be better. I have no clue. It's the third book in a series that I haven't read, and if I read Gene Wolfe, it's going to be the Book of the New Sun. Is that what it's called? I have no idea. The weird collections that everyone who loves Malazan end up reading, but that's probably not going to happen for like half a decade. Who knows? It's one of those projects I have in my head. Like one day. Next up, in this year, it feels like 2008. Obviously, there wasn't a lot going on that like really stuck with me or the test of time. The winner is the one who like I know the author. It's a Guy Gavriel Kay. It's called, I think, Isabel, but with a Y. Am I pronouncing this right? I don't know. When I was looking up what this is about, the biggest departure from Guy Gavriel Kay is that this is not a historical fantasy. He loves writing historical fantasies, and fantasies in quotes, because sometimes there's magic and sometimes it's just a reimagining of our history, but not even on our world. So it's like his fantasy because it's a secondary world. It's different. So yeah, I don't know a lot about this one, but it seems to have some interesting form to it, which could be interesting. I've only, like, when I've read Guy Gavriel Kay, and I've read a few, I don't talk about him a lot. I've read Tagana, and I've read the Finnevar Tapestry, which might be his first works? Unsure. Finnevar Tapestry is a fine trilogy. It definitely has some of the critiques people typically have with his work. Like, I think one of the female characters' development is completely done through sexual abuse. It's not great. And then I don't really like Tagana that much. It's a weird book. I don't know. In general, they're fine. I think his writing style is fine. He doesn't really focus on themes or events that I find interesting, so I have typically not gone towards his works. But this one feels different, so never say never. If I ever wanted to try and read some winners, this one could happen. Now, the next year, 2009, had two winners, and I do not know these books, but they were tied apparently. And the only other book that like people maybe still sort of talk about, and they don't really, but like Neil Gaiman wrote The Graveyard Book that year, and that was on the short list. But I've never read it. I think maybe, is it more of a graphic novel? I don't know. I feel like I remember Leanna talking about this book in a review, and I thought it was kind of interesting, but I also just don't vibe with Neil Gaiman's writing, you know. But The Shadow Year and Tender Morsels, they look pretty interesting. So when I was looking at them, The Tender Morsels seems to be like, there's a lot of books like this on this list where it's like, we are straddling two worlds. And one of the worlds was heaven, and the other one is like, not hell, but it has bears, and it's like more dangerous. And these three women have found themselves not being able to control which one I think they live in. I don't know. The cover looks really weird. And then the other one, The Shadow Year, this is a story about a young boy. And I think it's just, I think this one might be more like general fiction with some magical realism elements based off this very, very long thing, and they're comparing it to Ray Bradbury and stuff like that. So, and I feel like Jeffrey Ford maybe has written other things that people really like. I could be making that up. There's one author who's like written a book that I always get confused with that I think's last name is Ford, and it's like something with color. Unsure, but I don't know either of these books. I don't know if either, when I read the synopsis briefly of these, the two of them, that I was like, ooh, I want to try this. But if you've read these and you're like, oh, they're really good, let me know. Next up, 2010. All right, let's see. In general, there's a Jeff Vandermeer, Finch, that's on the short list. I've never even heard of Finch. I know the author, right? But this is definitely not the one that people think about. Annihilation is probably his most well-known book that people talk about. But the one who won, the author, and he's been on a lot of nominated lists here. This is China Miéville. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but this is The City and the City, which I actually hadn't heard of by him. I've seen a couple of the other ones, like Perdido Street and stuff like that. This is different. So let's see if I can find where The City and the City is, because I did pull up stuff that I didn't know to, like, see what they're about. All right, so this is based off, like, discovering what happened with this murder of this woman, but there's, like, a lot of tension between, I think, not, like, actual worlds, but, like, stuff that's happening in the city. So the idea of the city in the city, maybe. I don't know. It's interesting to me. I do want to read this author. He is on my list of people I should try out, because his take on urban fantasy is, I think, very interesting, very unique, and also foundational for a lot of people messing around in the space. I don't know if this is the one I should start with. Like I said, it's not one I see published very often anymore, but, you know. maybe it is the one I should start with. Now, starting in 2011, I start to know things, and I start to feel like, and it kind of makes sense. This is like my freshman year of college, senior year of high school. If I haven't been reading these things then, I have gone back this far, if that makes sense. And so in terms of winners, like on the short list, I know 4 of the authors. We have a Guy Gabriel Kay that I haven't read, but I know who Guy Gabriel Kay is. We have Karen Lord. We have A Redemption in Indigo is on this list. We have The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin, her debut. So both the debut of Lord and Jemisin are on this list, which is why, I feel like the convention goers and the judges have started to align with my taste as I've aged, And the winner is, I think this is the debut by Nnedi Okorafor, Who Fears Death. I could be wrong, but I feel like this is their debut. And it is one that actually I've been wanting to read, even though Nnedi Okorafor and I have a very fraught relationship in terms of me liking her style. But this one, actually, the plot reminded me of Remote Control, which I really liked. Just in terms of someone traveling, it's an apocalyptic time. Nnedi Okorafor's worlds are always just so rich. And that it's just her plots that I tend to have more of an issue with. And it's about a kid who's maybe special, and I don't know, I think it could have some really good, special sauce to it. So that one I'm excited for. The next year is 2012, and so in general, there are 2 very popular books on this short list. 11/22/63 by Stephen King. That's a fairly popular one by him. We have A Dance with Dragons by George R.R. Martin. But the winner, I don't know if anyone's read this book, and I can't even really find a synopsis of it, but it's called Osama, and it is written by an author who has been trapped during, I think, terrorist events and things like that. And so I have no idea what it's about, but it was the winner that year. And I'm kind of curious about it just on that merit alone. It really doesn't have that many people who have read it or ratings in the grand scheme of things. 2013, there's only one book that I really know here, and that's N.K. Jemisin's The Killing Moon. I really like The Killing Moon. The winner is A Leaf the Unseen. This is another one that I would read. This is cyberpunk fantasy, which, what is that? I don't even know. That sounds amazing. And it's this hacker, and he finds 100,000 Nights book, and it has something to do with the jinn, and it could change the intelligence agency. It sounds really interesting, or at the bare minimum, really unique. So that one's just, I'm curious about it. Cyberpunk fantasy. Face value there, I've never had that combination in my face. And then mixing up, fantastical folklore and tech, and then adding kind of maybe a spy element or hacking element. And in general, I think Middle Eastern fantasy can be really fun, especially because since we haven't, had as much of that in Western scopes, a lot of it feels fresher and new just because we don't publish it that often. So, yeah. 2014, there are 3 big hitters here, and I think any of these 3 have stood the test of time more than the winner. We've got Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan, which, one of my favorites. Love that series. So good. We have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which I do think is generally thought of to be one of his best. I think most people who have read him and have read that novella like it. I think it's a really good, creepy story. And then you have The Golem and the Jinni, which, is really good for fantasy and general fiction readers. And that one is consistently always in print. So I just feel like all 3 of these work really well. The winner is A Stranger in Olandria. I have no idea what this is about. I looked at the cover and I was completely unenthused. But, it's what am I missing? I don't know. It's this person who's just traveling because they've never gotten to travel before. It seems like a typical questy fantasy, maybe in a slightly different setting. People are comparing it to George R. R. Martin, but who doesn't compare books to George R. R. Martin? I don't know. So that's the winner, but I'm just saying with that slate of books, in terms of how much people like them in longevity, it's in hindsight, it should have been probably The Golem and the Jinni, I think. Probably. Or maybe, I feel The Golem and the Jinni is the one that's really stood the test of time. This next one for sure has a book. I want to read on it. And I'm actually very interested in the winner. I think the winner is really popular, and I think it makes sense. But for context, there's also The Goblin Emperor, which people still read today and really like. And then one that I just like is The City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is his foray into fantasy. I think before this he had written some horror. I really like this trilogy by him. It's kind of, not episodic, like they are connected, but it's like 5 to 10 years happens between each books and you follow a different point of view character. And they're like detective mystery stories in a world that used to have magic and no longer does, and the ramifications of that. Like, it's a very, he's really good at worlds. Like, his worlds are fascinating. The winner, though, is one I haven't read, but it's on my list to read, and that's The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. Ryan loves this book. He didn't write like Cloud Atlas nearly as much. He loves The Bone Clocks. So I'm always interested in reading books that Ryan likes because, yeah, I like seeing if I connect with the art that the person I love likes. I just think that's a fun little exercise. Sometimes it does not work. And I've never read a David Mitchell. Like, I've always wanted to read Cloud Atlas. Is that what it's called? I think that's what it's called because I liked the movie enough. I don't know. And I do think it should work for me because isn't it kind of vignette-y, right? And I'm a vignette-y person. But regardless, I think the winner makes sense. I just know that in the fantasy sphere, people still just rave about the Goblin Emperor. And so I feel like, in terms of, like, and maybe I shouldn't be thinking of this award for, like, longevity's sake, but if I attach a sense of, did this award rightfully help something live longer or predict what would live longer, I think it's doing, like, a 50-50 shot, and I just think that, like, the Goblin Emperor is definitely one that I've just heard so much about. Wow, 2016 is a good year. Wow. So, 2016, I think I know almost everything but the winner. So we have the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, not the winner, but it won the Hugo, so, you know, it's doing fine. Uprooted by Naomi Novik. Love it, hate it. People still talk about that book. Like, truly, it's one of... It's not the beginning of adult fantasy retellings, but it's up there. Like, I know young adult had been doing it for a while, but this is adult, regardless of if people mislabel or whatever. And I really liked the platonic focus, and I really enjoy Uprooted. There's a KJ Parker. I don't know the book, but KJ Parker's pretty popular. Kazu Ishiguro. He had The Buried Giant, which I think won him the Pulitzer this year, which is wild. And then A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, which I know about because Ryan's read it, and I helped him make his review for that on the channel. So I know all of these. The winner is The Chimes, which is about a place where no one can remember anything, and one person is starting to remember, and I think he's relatively young. Which sounds interesting, and I think it's a relatively short book. And if it beat all of these books, I probably should give it a shot. Like, I don't know. Maybe the panel was just trying to be weird, but I'm just like, this is a stacked list, in my opinion, and like, I don't hear anyone talk about The Chimes. And when I read the, blurb, I was like, that seems cool. So I don't know. That one I'm just curious about because of what it was stacked up against. The next one, 2017, we do have The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. We have Lovecraft Country, which I've never read, but there was like one season from HBO. And then the rest I haven't heard of. The winner is The Sudden Appearance of Hope, which when I read the synopsis is a lot like V.E. Schwab's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. You have this character, Claire, and Claire North is the author of Ithaca. Like, she does a lot of Greek retellings now. But I guess before her Greek retelling era, she wrote The Sudden Appearance of Hope. And The Sudden Appearance of Hope, like, it's about this girl, Hope, and no one remembers her. So every time she's interacting in the world, it's like the first time. I don't know if, that premise didn't interest me when I was hearing the synopsis of The Secret Life of Addie LaRue. And so I probably won't read it, but I'm more likely to read this Claire North than her Greek retellings, if I'm honest. Now, 2018 is when I'm like, maybe I should pay attention to this award because I love the winners. And in terms of the runner-ups, there's only one book that I know that didn't win, and that's The City of Brass, because 2018 is a stacked nomination year. So, City of Brass, amazing book. I love that book. The winners, though, are tied for Jade City by Fonda Lee and The Changeling by Victor LaValle, which I love both of them. I own both of them. I don't own that many books. I actually just finished a Victor LaValle recently and, like, obsessed with him. Fonda Lee, I read the first 2 or 3 chapters of Jade City and was like, I need to buy the rest of the trilogy right now. So, yeah, I love them. They're great. One's a great fantasy, urban city fantasy, and the other one's a really good dark fantasy with horror elements. Fantastic time. This next year, also has 3 books that I know, including The Winner. I've only read 2 of them, and I didn't read The Winner, so there's that. So maybe I should read The Winner. It's actually on my list. I've had it on TBRs. But the ones I've read were Trail of Lightning and The Poppy War. So I have read both of these, and I've liked both of them. They were both 4-star books. Witchmark by C.L. Polk. I've only read a novella by them, but I would be down to read this, and it's the start of a trilogy, I believe, so if I like it, I have more to read. I have had it on TBRs for years, and I just haven't gotten around to it. This next year is one where I'm like, I remember how popular the book that one was, and it's just so fascinating how much it just crashed in terms of like popularity, in terms of people talking about it. And there are other books on this list where I'm just like, I think we voted for the wrong book. Maybe. I haven't read the one that won, though, so who's to say? But for context, the short list of not the winners is The 10,000 Doors of January, The Raven Tower, Gideon the Ninth, and The Memory Police. And, like, I've only read 3 of those. Of the 3 I've read, I think The Memory Police or Gideon the Ninth makes sense for winning this category, or this award. The one that won, though, is Queen of the Conquered, which I'm actually curious to read. Like, I've just haven't read it. And also, what scares me about it, and maybe if you've read the entire duology, you can appease me here, but people don't talk about the second book. I actually looked, only like 300 people have like rated the second book on Goodreads. The second book came out a year after the first book. There wasn't like a huge gap, but just people didn't pick it up. Is it a bad duology? Is it a good enough contained first story? I don't know. I get really nervous about those types of things. But yeah, out to that 2020, stacked year. Now, 2021, this is like truly where you can tell that I've been reading fantasy, because like now I know like everything, and it's just like, it feels so good, like to see how much my knowledge has evolved through the years. But we have Piranesi, The Only Good Indians, Mexican Gothic, and The Midnight Bargain on the short list, and none of them even won. Like, excuse me. That's a stacked list, right? The Midnight Bargain was on the shortlist for the Hugo that year. Mexican Gothic, I think, actually won the Goodreads Choice Awards, and like people still adore it to this day. I just read The Only Good Indians, and oh my god, one of my favorite horrors ever. And I have not read Piranesi, but people love Piranesi. And the one that won, and I want to read it because I've read other Alea Dawn Johnson, and I am always curious about her brain because her brain does fascinating things, but this is Trouble the Saints. I know nothing about it. I know this author wrote a young adult book I read for the Ursula K. Le Guin Award in Fiction. I have a video on that if you want to see me reading all those books. And I'm just like, huh. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, if this book beat this stacked shortlist, what's it got going for it? I gotta see. Maybe it will speak to me. It might not, but like, it's like, oh, I'm curious, right? The next year, it's not as stacked for me, but it definitely has like books I know about. So 2022, we have A Master of Jinn. Everyone loved that book. I was not as big of a fan. We have The Last House of Needless Street, which is by a horror author who I still need to try out. I have not heard of The City Beautiful. And then we have Blackwater Sister, which is like a contemporary magical realism Malaysian fantasy that's been on my list for a while. And the winner is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Sori, which, I'm in my Burning Kingdoms era right now with the 3rd book coming out next month. Oh, I'm so excited. So yeah, I like the winner. I would like the winner to stand the test of times. That's how I feel. Because now we're definitely in the range of like, we don't know what's going to stand the test of time. It's like 4 years ago. 2023. Oh, this is a very good list. This is a very good list of books. I looked at the winners all before doing this video, but I did not look at all the nominations. So I'm just always like, oh yeah. We have Babel on the short list. Not that I loved it, but still, Babel's a pretty strong contender. The Ballad of Perilous Graves, which is not a book I love, but it's a book I appreciate with my entire being. It's how it captures New Orleans as a place. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Siren Queen by Nevo, my favorite Nevo, by a country mile. So good. I love the golden age of Hollywood. I love how monstrous she makes it, but also with the love that comes with that monstrousness. And then we have Spear by Nicola Griffith, which I have read and I enjoyed. That's like novella to short novel length retelling of an Arthurian character, and I thought it was pretty good. The winner, and one that my friend has read and has told me I should read, and I think is getting sequels, is Saint Death's Daughter. So I keep meaning to read this. I just haven't yet. But yeah, that was a fun year. And now, the most recent year, because we just had the awards, gosh, a week ago or something like that. They took place in like Niagara, New York or whatever. So, the shortlist, because apparently this book is on every shortlist, and I am just the weird person who does not like it, but Witch King. Witch King was on the shortlist. It didn't win. Thank God. Really, no hate. If you love this book, I'm happy for you. You're getting a sequel. Enjoy your time. Starling House, Alexi Harrow. She's like a reward darling. I thought this book was just fine. Like a good read. It would be good for a trip. Have a good time. You want a book you can finish in 3 days and feel engaged? I think it's great for that. We have Shiggity and the Brass Head of Abalufon, which I have read. It was a heisty book. It was interesting. I liked it. I didn't love it, but I had a good time. I have not read The Possibilities, and again, I have not read any Catriona Ward, and The Looking Glass Sound was on this list. The winner, though, that I really want to read, especially because I'm reading a book by her right now, is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I'm currently reading The Good Place. It's really good. So yeah, this is a really interesting award. I just like looking at it. I think maybe when I'm making some of my goals for next year, maybe I should pick like, a handful of the winners or things on the short list to like sprinkle in, because I'm always looking for unique ways for myself to go into backlist books. And like before 2005, things get backlist in a way that I'm not sure I would enjoy, because sometimes just older fantasy just doesn't work for me. But I think it'd be cool to like look at some of these winners I talked about and see like, what were they like? Especially ones that were in the years that were stacked. I don't know. Let me know any of your opinions down in the comments below. I'll link the Wikipedia page I was using as I scrolled through this in case you wanted to click on any books that I was looking at. And if you just want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, leave a world emoji, because that's cliche and makes sense. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one.